Very good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming this morning. So first, my name is Mita Tsuruoka, Associate Professor here at Faculty of Policy Management, Keio University. I'll be moderating today's very special event. So first, let me invite Professor Kohei Ito, President of Keio University, for welcome remarks, please.
Good morning, His and Her Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, fellow faculty members and staff, and students of Keio University. It is my great pleasure to welcome His Excellency Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, to Keio University. Since February 24th last year, we have been following the war in Ukraine so closely, wishing and praying all the best for Ukrainians and acting to extend our support. Soon after Russia's aggression against Ukraine has started, Keio professors on security and geopolitical regional studies have got together to broadcast YouTube programs to explain our analysis on Ukraine's situation and propose how we can support Ukrainians from Japan. We have also raised funding to welcome 4 university graduates from Ukraine to pursue their graduate studies here at Keio. I'm happy to see some of them here this morning. There are so many ways to be a part of resistance against Putin's Russia. However, it is fair to say that the most direct way to save lives of amazingly brave and dedicated Ukrainians is to extend militaristic support. NATO, together with US, is at its forefront. 50 years ago, in December 2007, NATO Secretary General Job de Hoop Scheffer visited us here at Keio University. Secretary General Stoltenberg, you are the second Secretary General of NATO we welcome at Keio University. However, the world has changed dramatically since 15 years ago, and Japan-NATO cooperation has developed substantially over the past decade. Your visit to Japan as the NATO General this time is imposing a tremendous impact on Japan. 2 weeks ago in the World Economic Forum in Davos, I have heard directly from you that the fight against Putin's Russia is about protecting our values, our democracy. You have also praised the courage and ability of Ukrainians to fight to protect their sovereignty. However, you have also warned us not to underestimate Russia until complete victory is achieved. Today marks exactly 2 years since Aung San Suu Kyi was arrested in coup d'etat by the military in Myanmar. Unfortunately, the democracy is at stake not only in Europe, but also in the world. Keio University is one of the leading academic institutions in Japan. We are proud of our academic contributions in the field of international relations and security studies. Faculty members and students here in this room today are mainly from Department of Politics in the Faculty of Law and the Faculty of Policy Management. While Keio University's school motto is "The pen is mightier than the sword," recent situation in the world has forced us to think what it takes to defend the country and its people. Clearly, the entire world, including universities, are facing new challenges. Keio University's goal is to sustain world peace by the diplomatic means. Therefore, I'm happy to inform you that today's event also marks the pre-opening of Keio University Global Research Institutes. Within these institutes, we are planning to establish Keio Center for Strategy, a new research center that stimulates strategic planning and dialogues at the global level. So Secretary General Stoltenberg, now the floor is yours. We look forward to your remarks and discussions to follow. Thank you.
Professor Io, Professor Churuoka. Good morning to everyone. It's great to be here at Keio University. Japan is an important global actor, actively promoting peace and supporting the rules-based international order. This is what NATO stands for too. And for almost 75 years, NATO has ensured peace in the Euro-Atlantic area, allowing democracy, freedom, and prosperity to flourish. But today, the global order that has served us so well for many decades is under threat. Moscow and Beijing are at the forefront of an authoritarian pushback. Russia's war in Ukraine has shattered peace in Europe. North Korea continues to threaten international security through its reckless missile tests. And other global challenges are rising, from terrorism to climate change, cyber threats, and nuclear proliferation. This is our new security reality. A reality that connects all of us who support peace, freedom, and democracy. And the reality that we need to face collectively. Europe and North America together in NATO, working hand in hand with our many partners across the globe, including here in the Indo-Pacific. Last June, I was honored to welcome Prime Minister Kishida to our NATO summit in Madrid. It was the first time he and leaders from our other Indo-Pacific partners, Australia, New Zealand, and South Korea, participated together in a NATO summit, a testimony to our growing ties. We may be oceans apart, but our security is closely connected. And we share the same values, interests, and concerns. This includes supporting Ukraine. Almost 1 year ago, President Putin launched a war of aggression against Ukraine to take control over the country and take away people's freedom. This war is not just a European crisis. It is a challenge to global security and global stability. In response, NATO, allies, and our partners around the world, including Japan, have condemned this illegal and unjustifiable war. And we have been providing Ukraine unprecedented assistance. I want to thank Japan for your substantial support. Yesterday, I visited Iruma Air Base and saw for myself the Japanese cargo planes transporting life-saving aid to the Ukrainian people. Our support makes a real difference for the Ukrainians, helping them not only to survive, but also to push back the Russian invader and liberate their territory. Ukraine needs our continued support for as long as it takes, because if Putin wins, the message to Moscow and to Beijing will be that they can achieve what they want through the use of brute force. This would make the world more dangerous and us more vulnerable. At the same time as we support Ukraine, NATO's main priority is to protect our 1 billion people and every inch of Allied territory. To do this, we have been strengthening our military presence, especially in the eastern part of the alliance. We have more troops on high alert, ready to move whenever and wherever needed. Stronger defenses are not to provoke a conflict with Russia, but to prevent the conflict and preserve peace. Meanwhile, Beijing is watching closely and learning lessons that may influence its future decisions. what is happening in Europe today could happen in East Asia tomorrow. China is not NATO's adversary, but its growing assertiveness and its coercive policies have consequences for your security in the Indo-Pacific and ours in the Euro-Atlantic. We must work together to address them. Beijing is substantially building up its military forces, including nuclear weapons, without any transparency. It is attempting to assert control over the South China Sea and threatening Taiwan, trying to take control of critical infrastructure, including in NATO countries, repressing its own citizens through advanced technology, and spreading Russian disinformation about NATO and the war in Ukraine. Moscow and Beijing are deepening their strategic partnership. The two countries train and operate more together militarily, conducting joint naval and air patrols also in the vicinity of Japan. Their economic cooperation is increasing, and China has not condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. A year ago, for the first time ever, China backed Russia's demand that NATO closes its door to new member states. But NATO's door remains open. Soon, two new countries, Finland and Sweden, will join the alliance. This sends a powerful message. Violence and intimidation do not work. This is a more dangerous and competitive world. Our security is not regional, but global. So it is essential to have friends. Among NATO partners, none is closer or more capable than Japan. I'm glad that our long-lasting friendship is growing stronger by the day. In the past, we have worked together on issues ranging from counterterrorism to counter-piracy. Going forward, we will do more together. Yesterday, Prime Minister Kishida and I agreed a joint statement. It sets out our plan to step up NATO-Japan cooperation in areas like cyber defense, new technologies, countering hybrid threats, and upholding the rules-based international order. I also told him that I strongly welcome Japan's historic new national security strategy. And I'm glad that Japan is planning to reach the NATO benchmark of 2% of GDP devoted to defense. This demonstrates that Japan takes international security seriously. It makes you an even more powerful partner for peace. So I look forward to further deepening our cooperation. In a more dangerous world, Japan can count on NATO to stand with you, to promote peace, protect our shared security, and preserve a global system based on norms and values. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. I'm quite sure that everyone in this room has learned immensely from the remarks, a lot to reflect. So now let me turn into a brief panel discussion with Keio professors. So let me invite Professors Yuichi Hosoya and Satoru Mori. So President Ito referred to the fact that today's event marking a pre-opening of the KGRI, the Keio University Global Research Institute Center for Strategy. And the Professor Hosoya is to be a director of the new center, and Professor Mori and myself, deputy directors. And also the hidden purpose of this panel discussion is to warm ourselves up and allowing students to think about questions. So each panelist has 2 or maximum 3 minutes for initial remarks for the first round, and then we will get back to the Secretary General for response. Assuming that the professors are kind enough to comply with time limits, hopefully, we will do a second round as well. So first, Professor Hosoya, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Tsuruka, and thank you very much, Secretary General, for your wonderful keynote speech. 25 years ago, when I was a graduate student here, I wrote my PhD dissertation on the origins of the NATO. And after 25 years, I'm now sitting here with NATO Secretary General on the EU-Japan relations, NATO-Japan relations, and I'm really grateful that you have been devoting greatly to enhance the relationship. You actually make my dream come true, because it's really important for Japan to strengthen our cooperation with like-minded countries. I have one question. Last year was a turning point for me for Japan-NATO relations, because Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida attended NATO summit meeting for the first time as a Japanese Prime Minister. Actually, I was in Madrid there to attend NATO's public forum, and I listened to your speech. And I was really glad to see that AP4 actually was there to try to support NATO's activities. In this region, I think that it is important for us and NATO to strengthen, enhance our deterrence towards China's welcoming certain military activities here, particularly in Taiwan and also the Senkaku Islands. So my question is to Secretary General, what is the essential point for us to strengthen deterrence towards China's unwelcoming military activity here? It is essential not to repeat the tragedy again, as we saw in Ukraine. So it is essential for us to strengthen our deterrence towards further those kind of military activities. This is my comment and question to you.
Thank you very much. And then Professor Mori, please.
Yes. First of all, I want to join my colleagues in welcoming you to Keio University. Thank you very much for being with us. I have been tasked to make some initial remarks concerning on the issue of how the Russian invasion of Ukraine has impacted the way we think about security in this corner of the region, of the world. So allow me to make a couple of points very briefly. My first point is that Putin's threat to use nuclear weapons appears to have receded for the time being. But nevertheless, it has highlighted the significance of the role of nuclear weapons in international security. And I think one of NATO and Japan and the Japan-US alliance, under different contexts, face a common question, which is probably one of the most difficult questions regarding contemporary strategy, and that is, how can we deter or respond to nuclear blackmail by a major revisionist power? So that would be my first point. My second point is that the sense of threat generated by the Russian aggression against Ukraine has spilled over to East Asia. And it has heightened a sense of alarm against a possible Taiwan contingency. As you mentioned, defense experts in Tokyo and Washington are now debating about what lessons China will learn from Russia's aggression. Prime Minister Kishida has remarked that Ukraine today could be East Asia tomorrow. And the recent national security strategy of Japan also mentions that the possibility, similar situation from Ukraine, could actually happen in the Indo-Pacific region, particularly in East Asia. So it appears that both NATO members and US allies in East Asia are now discovering or sort of rediscovering the interconnectedness of European security and Indo-Pacific security. I think moving forward, there are opportunities for Japan-NATO cooperation. You mentioned several programs. And I wonder what you see as one of the most promising areas. You mentioned about cyber defense, joint emerging and disruptive technologies will be another area, and you also talked about space cooperation. What do you think are the most low-hanging fruit programs that you see as an opportunity to advance Japan-NATO cooperation? I would appreciate if I could get your thoughts on those issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your questions. First, on China, which was the question raised by Professor Husaya. I think we all have to understand that for many, many years, China was not on the NATO agenda, but especially at our summit last year in Madrid, we agreed a new strategic concept where we for the first time addressed China. That was not the case in the previous strategic concept, and that reflects that NATO has come a long way when it comes to recognizing and also addressing the challenges that China poses to us. We don't regard China as an adversary. And we don't seek confrontation with China, or actually we don't seek confrontation with anyone. NATO is a defensive alliance. And we will continue to engage with China on issues where we see common or potential common interest on arms control, on climate change, and other issues. At the same time, we will be remiss if we did not expose the challenges that China poses to our security, to our values, and to our interests. And that's exactly what is also reflected in the new strategic concept that we agreed last year. Because we all have to realize that China is becoming a more and more an authoritarian power that is cracking down on human rights, not only in Hong Kong, but throughout the country. And which is investing heavily in new modern military capabilities, in long-range missiles that can reach all NATO territory, in more and more nuclear weapons, and advanced weapon systems, including by applying new disruptive technologies into their weapon systems, including artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and many of the other technologies which are now used to develop even more advanced weapons. Then we see their assertive behavior, not least in the South China Sea, where China tries to assert control of the South China Sea. And then we see the threats against Taiwan. And all of this matters for our security. Also because it matters, of course, for the security of the countries in this region, in East Asia, but it matters also for NATO allies. Also because we see that China is coming closer to us. We see them in cyberspace. We see them in Africa, in the Arctic, but also trying to control critical infrastructure in Europe. So this idea that we can in a way say that China doesn't matter for NATO is wrong, doesn't work. Security is global, security is not regional. And that's even more obvious when we address the threats we see in cyberspace, space, the outer space, where also China is developing new capabilities. And also the war in Ukraine demonstrates how security is interconnected. It demonstrates how what happens in Europe has a consequence for East Asia, and also what happens in East Asia matters for Europe. Because we have to remember that just weeks before the invasion, President Putin went to Beijing and met with President Xi, where they signed a declaration where they promised partnership without limits, and where China for the first time actually called on NATO to close its doors. And we see how North Korea is providing weapons to the Wagner Group, which plays a key role in Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine. So so you asked me about what should NATO do. Well, so we have to make sure that we have credible deterrence and defense. We have to ensure that we invest in technology, as we do, and allies have stepped up. We have to protect our critical infrastructure, resilience, but we also have to work more closely with our partners in the Indo-Pacific. And that's exactly what we do. Yesterday I signed a joint statement with Prime Minister Kishida, where we reiterated our strong partnership and where we outlined where we can do more together. So working with partners around the globe, especially here in the Indo-Pacific, is part of the answer to a more dangerous and unpredictable world. Then I actually partly also answered the second question. More specifically, you asked me in which areas we could work together. Well, there are many areas. I mentioned some of them: cyber technology, maritime, arms control, and all these areas are areas where we now are stepping up and doing more together. But I think also just the fact that we send a strong political message together in itself is a way to protect our values: democracy, the rule of law, and the rules-based international order. Sorry, I've actually forgotten one specific issue, and that is nuclear. And you asked me that question. Russia's President Putin's nuclear rhetoric is dangerous, is reckless, and I think, being in Japan, I think you understand that better than anyone else. Russia must know that the nuclear war can never be won and should never be fought, and it will have severe consequences. And we have, of course, clearly communicated this again and again to Russia. And we also have to fully understand that NATO cannot give into blackmail, because then we cannot support Ukraine. And NATO, NATO and NATO allies provide support to Ukraine, but the first thing we did on the day of the invasion was to increase our military presence in the eastern part of the alliance as a defensive measure to protect NATO allies and to reduce the risk of escalation beyond Ukraine, to send a clear message to Moscow that we are there to protect every inch of allied territory. And we do that to remove any room for misunderstanding, miscalculation in Moscow about our readiness to protect every ally. And as long as that's absolutely clear, then we preserve peace, we prevent conflict. That's the purpose of deterrence. And we have demonstrated the value of that in the midst of this Ukraine war.
Thank you very much. Any further response? Thank you very much for your answers to your difficult questions. And well, I was also glad to see that after seeing the result of yesterday's summit meeting with you and between you and Prime Minister Kishida, it was written in a statement that the NATO basically welcomes Japan's intention to regularly participate in North Atlantic Council as well as NATO's Chief of Defense meetings. And I think this is a good thing to share important information as well as to promote much closer cooperation between the two sides. And I think AP4 would follow this course to try to institutionalize or to make these meetings more in a regular basis. So my another question to you is how Japan and NATO can utilize the opportunity to much more institutionalize these cooperation framework which you have been consolidating.
Thank you very much. I just have one very simple question. I think one of the strengths of NATO is that you have 30 member states, soon to become 32. in the Western Pacific, we only have a limited number of US allies in the region. So in the case of a Taiwan contingency, I think we are going to need all the support from NATO. This is a sensitive issue, so please, if you can respond with a general remark, but do you think there's a possibility for NATO and United States and Japan to sort of start engaging in discussions about a Taiwan situation? Thank you.
Let me add one more, a very quick question. So you talked about China's nuclear weapons. So China's the development and expansion of nuclear arsenal is something that NATO is becoming more concerned about. What I'm wondering is that, yes, the NATO's main job is to deter Russia, but given the fact that China's nuclear weapons are there and it's expanding, so do you see any NATO role in deterring China in addition to deterring Russia? Thank you.
So NATO's role is to deter any potential adversary. There's not a name tag on NATO's deterrence. It's deterrence against attacks against NATO allies, regardless from whom that attacks or those threats may come. So that's the message to any potential adversary. As at the same time, NATO is a defensive alliance, so we don't see confrontation. And we have proven that for more than 70 years. Our purpose is to preserve peace, prevent conflict. But we strongly believe that the credible deterrence is the best and the most credible way to achieve exactly that. Then NATO will remain an alliance of North America and Europe. But this alliance, also North America and Europe, we face global challenges. And that's nothing new, actually. Terrorism has been there for many years, and that's a global threat. Cyber is by nature global. And of course, we now also see all the challenges in the outer space, by nature global. And then, of course, the fact that Russia and China are coming closer, and the significant investments by China in new advanced military capabilities just underlines that China poses a threat, poses a challenge also to NATO allies. So the message is again and again that security is not regional, security is global, and security is interconnected. And therefore, it is so important to work more closely with our partners in the Indo-Pacific. And you asked me about whether we could institutionalize that. Well, in many ways, we have already institutionalized it by as you refer to the AP4 as the Asia-Pacific 4. That's one of the many NATO acronyms, but it's actually our partnership with our 4 partners in the Asia-Pacific or Indo-Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, and Japan. And we are strengthening that partnership in many different ways, partly to our practical cooperation on maritime, cyber, and other issues, but also by having political leaders, heads of state and government, ministers, military leaders participating more in NATO meetings, including in our governing body, the North Atlantic Council. And therefore, it was an historic moment when all the heads of state and government from the 4 Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific partners participated at our summit in Madrid last year. And my intention is to invite all 4 of them also to the summit in Vilnius this year. And then on top of the meeting at the summit level, we also have now more meetings at the ministerial level where we invite the foreign ministers and other representatives from our Asia-Pacific partners. So we are stepping up also the institutionalized cooperation. I guess there are many more questions, but I'll stop there because then we have time for questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Wonderful conversation. Now we turn to students. So please raise your hand if you have any question. And microphone is coming. So from where? Microphone is coming. Okay, the first row. Oh.
Thank you very much for coming to Japan and providing such a wonderful opportunity for us. And currently, I'm working on a dissertation on NATO's nuclear sharing arrangement. So, if I may, I would like to ask a question on those fields. So, I guess for NATO, there are various factors which contribute to its deterrent structure, conventional forces and nuclear forces. And I do suspect that out of that, nuclear deterrence is central for NATO's deterrent structure and stability, considering that NATO is a nuclear alliance. But however, while there are various like nuclear capability which contributes to it, such as U.S. triad offered to NATO and the strategic nuclear forces provided by UK and France. Also, NATO relies on the non-strategic nuclear weapons which are deployed to Europe. Regarding that, what is the most central reason why NATO is still basing non-strategic nuclear weapons in Europe and also maintaining its nuclear sharing arrangement within the alliance? So, so while it's like military utility might have decreased, non-strategic nuclear weapons, NATO still like remaining that structure. So, if I could get the insight on that, could I ask why is NATO still, maintaining that capability and for its alliance's cohesion? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So we collect, I think, 3 questions, and then so please sit in next. Sit in next. The lady.
Thank you so much for taking time for us and visiting Keio. I'm Yoko Higano, a student of the Faculty of Policy Management. When I look at news or discuss in class regarding NATO and Ukraine, I always confuse how can I deal with those issues as a student. So I would like to ask what kind of perspective we should have as a university student to think those kind of issues. Thank you.
What kind of issues?
Regarding NATO and Ukraine.
Wow.
Yep, thank you.
And
Good afternoon. I have pretty much 2 questions, a good one and bad one. Maybe you can choose. I'm Yehor Lazarok. I'm from Graduate School of Media and Governance, Global Governance 1. And, well, I have pretty much only 2 questions. Which will you choose, good or bad one?
anyway, go ahead. Perhaps just one question, please.
Yeah. Well, technically, what will NATO do in case of military defeat of Ukraine? In case of military defeat of Ukraine? Like?
Defeat.
Defeat.
So if Russia won,
Yeah.
what would happen to NATO? Okay.
First, on nuclear and NATO's nuclear sharing arrangements. NATO's goal is a world without nuclear weapons. But as long as nuclear weapons exist, NATO will remain a nuclear alliance. Because we simply don't believe that a world where NATO and NATO allies get rid of all their nuclear weapons and Russia, China, North Korea keep theirs, that's not a safer world. So the only way to reach a goal with fewer or even without any nuclear weapons is through balanced, verifiable arms control. And the challenge is that we have seen the demise of the global arms control architecture, and not least because of Russia's violation of, for instance, the INF Treaty that banned intermediate range nuclear weapons, missiles. And also because China, which is now investing heavily in more and more nuclear weapons, including long-range weapons, they partly do it without any transparency, because the advantage of arms control is partly that put limits on the number of weapons, but you also provide systems for inspection and transparency. And since China is not engaging in any kind of meaningful dialogue on arms control on nuclear weapons, we also have very little transparency. So this has made arms control, nuclear arms control, extremely difficult, and I actually see it backtracking. So all of this, of course, makes it important that we retain our nuclear deterrence as long as we see other countries investing more in nuclear weapons. But again, we are always ready to meaningful and verifiable arms control, but not unilateral NATO nuclear disarmament. The nuclear sharing arrangements are a way of NATO, for NATO allies, to have extended nuclear deterrence, meaning that there are only 3 allies, the United States, by far the biggest, but also United Kingdom and France, that have nuclear weapons. NATO is very much in favor of non-proliferation, but for decades we have had the nuclear sharing arrangements, meaning that the United States has some nuclear weapons in Europe, but then we have European allies providing the framework together to ensure that this is part of a credible nuclear deterrence, meaning that European allies provide planes, we have joint command and control, doctrines, so this is something we do together. The US retains the ownership to the weapons, but then we have all the structures around that where European allies participate. And then you ask, why do we retain that? So first of all, you need to understand that since the end of the Cold War, NATO has roughly reduced its number of nuclear warheads in Europe by 90%. So it's a huge reduction. But we retain the nuclear sharing arrangements, not least because we believe that that's part of a credible nuclear deterrence that also involve European allies in a direct way, and also involve those allies that don't possess nuclear weapons. So to strengthen the kind of collective ownership, political ownership, and commitment without having nuclear weapons, I think the nuclear sharing arrangements, which are well-tested systems, are an important part of our collective deterrence and defense. And again, I think in the light of the war in Ukraine, we see the value of this, because deterrence is a way to prevent the conflict in Ukraine from escalating beyond Ukraine. Then the second question was about how universities can work on NATO and Europe and Ukraine. Oh, sorry. Well, I think first of all, it's extremely important that universities, as I say, are extremely focused on what is going on there. There's a brutal war of aggression, and just to learn and understand more about the war and why it happened is important. I also know that there are many students, many universities, which are part of the political messaging of stepping up support to Ukraine. But of course, it's for every university and every student and every professor to decide exactly what they do as individuals. I strongly believe in the kind of freedom, the academic freedom that the university represents. So to also have discussions about how to best respond to the crisis or the war is also part of what I think are important responsibilities for academic institutions. Then we have one clear message, and that is that President Putin must not win in Ukraine. And that's the reason why we are delivering unprecedented support to Ukraine. President Putin made at least 2 big strategic mistakes when he invaded Ukraine. The first and the biggest mistake was to totally underestimate Ukraine. The courage, the bravery of the Ukrainian armed forces, the commitment of the Ukrainian political leadership, and the bravery of the Ukrainian people. He thought he was going to take control of Ukraine within days. Now he has been there for almost a year, and what we have seen is that Ukrainians have been able to push back the Russian invaders, first from the north around Kiev, then in the east around Kharkiv, and then in the south around Kherson. This is first and foremost a Ukrainian victory. They own those victories and what they have achieved. But of course, it is also connected to the second big strategic mistake that President Putin made, and that was to underestimate NATO partners and allies, including Japan. Our unity in imposing sanctions, our unity in providing support, humanitarian support, economic support, but also military support. And we do that because we all realize that this goes beyond Ukraine. The war in Ukraine is a tragedy for the Ukrainians, but it's dangerous for all of us, and will become even more dangerous if President Putin wins, because that will send a message to authoritarian leaders, including in this part of the world, that when they use military force, they can achieve what they win, what they will. So we will also, the aim, we are committed to stay by Ukraine for as long as it takes to ensure that Ukraine is able to retake territory, liberate their land, win and prevail as a sovereign independent nation in Europe.
Thank you very much. So please raise a hand clearly. Okay, so perhaps this side.
Mr. Secretary General, thank you for coming to Keio University. I'm a master's student here. I have a question regarding alliance management and your confidence in NATO's deterrence. So 11 months has passed since the outbreak of the war, and I'm sure that NATO has went through a lot of struggle. Could you tell us what was the most challenging and stressful thing that since the war broke out? And was there any time you lost confidence in NATO's capability and deterrence? And do you have any lessons that can be applied to future US-Japan alliance or NATO-Japan relationship? Thank you.
Well, thank you for your time. I'm an international student learning politics in Japan, and I have one question. What do you think about the argument saying that it is NATO's expansion that triggered the war in Ukraine? And one would claim that NATO is a defensive alliance, but if I were policymaker in Moscow, I would not be happy to see foreign troops stationed near Russia's borders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General NATO and Keio University Global Research Institute. My name is Monica Nilasari. I'm from the Graduate School Media and Governance. My questions is regarding the Asia-Pacific cooperations. From your remarks, you emphasized that security is not regional, but global, and then NATO is strengthening its cooperation with the Asia-Pacific 4. However, China also possesses challenges not only in East Asia, but also in Asia in general. And my questions would be, how is NATO cooperations with the Southeast Asian countries, and specifically on the cyber defense cooperations, whether NATO will expand its cooperations not only to the Asia-Pacific 4, but also to the Southeast Asian countries. Thank you.
The first question was about whether I, at any stage, lost confidence in NATO's deterrence, and the answer is no. I never lost confidence in NATO's deterrence. Then the question was, what was the most challenging moment? Well, I think that the most challenging and stressing moment was and still is when we see the suffering, the violence, the brutality of the war, and not least how many civilians which are killed and wounded as a consequence of this war. And what we see are actually deliberate attacks on civilian infrastructure, on homes, hospitals, and of course to attack the power grid, the gas supplies, especially during the autumn when we went into the winter, had one purpose, and that was to ensure maximum suffering for the people of Ukraine, the civilians, to deprive them of water, heating, light. And of course this is stressful for everyone. Then we may be shocked by the brutality, but we should not be surprised, because the war in Ukraine is part of a pattern. We saw the brutality in Grozny. We saw the invasion of Georgia in 2008 by Russia. We saw the bombing of Aleppo, the brutality of warfare in Syria. And then we have to remember that the war in Ukraine didn't start in February last year. It started in 2014 when Russia illegally annexed Crimea and went into eastern Donbass. And since then there has been war in Ukraine. What happened in February was a big escalation with a full-fledged invasion, but war has been also the fact on the ground for many years already. That's also the reason why NATO was prepared, because this is a part of a pattern. So we started in 2014, after the illegal annexation of Crimea, to implement the biggest adaptation of this alliance in generations, with more combat-ready troops in the eastern part of the alliance, with higher readiness of forces, with new military domains in cyber and space, with increased defense spending, more exercises. And again, not to provoke a war, but to prevent the war, to remove any room for misunderstanding, miscalculation that could lead to something similar against, for instance, the Baltic countries, which are also former Soviet republics, as we have seen against Ukraine. So no, I've never doubted the strength of NATO's deterrence, but that's also because we have actually been able to adapt and to strengthen our deterrence in light of what we saw was coming. And then we had specific intelligence. So not only was this part of a pattern, but in the autumn of 2021, months before the election, the invasion, we actually had intelligence, and we did something we normally don't do in NATO. We shared that intelligence, so we warned against the plans of invasion, and we engaged actively with Russia to try to prevent the war in diplomatic and political efforts. We had meetings in Brussels with Russia. We responded to their demands. They had a written demands, a treaty proposal from Russia, and we were ready to sit down. We actually proposed a series of meetings, diplomatic efforts to prevent the war. But President Putin, he just went on and invaded Ukraine. And we were prepared, so we activated our defense plans the same morning and increased our military presence in the east, again to preserve escalation, to prevent escalation. Then the next question was about whether as a NATO expansion is the reason for the war. I accept the question, because at least some people are asking the question. But just the way of asking the question reflects a total wrong understanding of what it means to be sovereign, independent nations. And that has been enshrined in treaties again and again, also treaties which have been signed by Russia. And that is that every nation, big or small, have the right to choose their own path. And this idea that if free democratic nations choose a path I don't like, I have the right to invade them. If you accept that, then we move into a really dangerous world. Because then we move into a world where might is right and not a rules-based international order. Because it happens quite often, I think, that big countries don't like what smaller neighbors do. But if that gives them a right to invade them, then there is no rules-based order at all. So just this thinking, that's a kind of aggressive thing, that Lithuania or Latvia, small countries bordering Russia, that's an aggressive action that they join NATO. Just that assumption is so fundamentally wrong. Because it's not NATO moving aggressively east. What happened after the end of the Cold War was that newly independent sovereign nations, through democratic free processes, decided that they wanted to be part of NATO. And should we say, no, you don't have that freedom, because Russia doesn't like it, then we will actually reintroduce a system of sphere of influence. And that's exactly what President Putin wants. He wants a different Europe. He wants a Europe where he controls neighbors, where he can decide what neighbors do or not do. And if they don't do as he wants, he can invade them. And you know, I'm coming from Norway, and Norway is a small country bordering Russia. And when NATO was established in 1949, Norway was the only country in NATO bordering Russia. And of course, Russia or the Soviet Union didn't like that. They said it was bad that we had NATO on Russia's border or Soviet borders, but I'm very happy that Washington, London, Paris, the big countries in NATO at that time, said it's for Norway to decide. It's not for Moscow to decide what Norway can do. So they accepted Norway as a member of NATO. And in exactly the same way, we have accepted the free, independent choice of free, independent nations to be part of NATO. And the NATO enlargement has helped to spread democracy, freedom, prosperity across Europe in a way we haven't seen ever before. That's the consequence of NATO enlargement. It's only Russia that in a way interprets that as a threat. Because President Putin is afraid of democracy, freedom. Because that will undermine his authoritarian regime. And then, I think it's very important to understand that what European allies and European countries have demonstrated is that the message from President Putin that he wants less NATO, fewer or not, he doesn't like NATO troops on Russia's border, and he don't want more NATO enlargement. That was actually part of the explicit reason for invading Ukraine. He's getting exactly the opposite. Because as a result of the invasion, NATO has increased its military presence on the borders of Russia to deter further aggressive actions by Russia. And Finland and Sweden, as a direct consequence of the invasion and the messaging from Russia that they don't want new NATO allies, they don't want NATO's door to remain open, then Finland and Sweden said, because Russia is now trying to close the door to NATO, we go in. So again, it is extremely dangerous to accept that democratic free decisions of countries to join or to choose their own path is an excuse for brutal use of force against those countries. So I accept the question, but the thinking is dangerous because that will bring us back to an age we don't want to be in, where big powers decide what small nations can do. Oh, sorry. So this is no. Also, first of all, we have 4 partners where we have formalized partnership. We meet, we have programs, we have cooperation, and that is Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, and Australia. Then, of course, there are many other countries in Southeast Asia or in East Asia which are important for NATO, but so far we have not establish any formalized relationship with them. We are ready to engage with more countries, but of course it has to be a mutual interest. Then, of course, NATO allies, and especially United States, but also other NATO allies, they have different kinds of relationships with more countries than just the 4 we have a formalized NATO partnership with. I believe in this partnership because I strongly believe that it is of mutual benefit. And I mentioned already cyber, all the other areas where we can work together, and we are more than ready to further strengthen and expand the partnership with countries in this region.
Okay, thank you very much. There are so many more questions, but I'm afraid we have to end this session. But so we very much appreciate the Secretary General's quite candid and straightforward and powerful messages. Thank you very much. And as a humble way to show our appreciation, the President Ito would like to give a small gift to the Secretary General. So please. Thank you very much. This concludes the event. But please remain seated because the Secretary General's delegation has to leave the room now. So thank you very much for your cooperation.